Season 5, Episode 14 of Brackets, Bubble, and Bit Steelers. I am Sam Fetterman. That is Jonathan Lidskin. This is the fourth preview in the last 2 days. We did 3 yesterday, and we have one today. Ryan Hammer is here with us to preview the Maryland Terrapins. Ryan, how you doing?
That I am here to do. I'm good. How are you?
We are doing great, and you're here to make your long-awaited Brackets, Bubbles, and Bit Steelers debut as well.
Yeah, very exciting. I'm actually thrilled to be here.
I think that we will talk a lot about the new pieces around Maryland basketball this year, but also the pieces that come back and need to take a step forward. And that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with the two players that are projected to start for the Maryland Terrapins that were on the team last year in Julian Reese and Deshaun Harris-Smith. I do want to talk about the dynamic between Reese and Derek Queen alone, but I want to start with Deshaun Harris-Smith, which you probably didn't expect to hear.
I mean, how could I not expect that?
But we were both very high on Deshaun Harris-Smith last year. I'm sure you were as well. I remember you being high on Deshaun Harris-Smith.
I was.
What do you think went wrong for DHS, and how can he fix that in year 2 with maybe a different role?
Yeah. It might sound like a cop-out, but like just settling in experience, like it happens a lot, especially now with like the average age of all college players in every team, especially power teams, are a lot older. And he struggles from day one, especially to shoot the ball, which we kind of knew was a concern, didn't know how bad it was going to be. And he wasn't as blisteringly unbelievable, I think, as a defender and as consistent enough to be like on the floor all the time, no matter what. It didn't help that the rest of the team couldn't shoot. Like nobody could shoot, where if you put him on a team of all shooters, like it doesn't matter if he has to shoot. It's almost like Ben Simmons in the NBA when he was actually like playing and good. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. But
no, when Ben Simmons was playing and good, he was good.
That's my point, is that the non-shooting becomes a non-factor, but he was on a non-shooting team. So it was a problem because people thought that he was part of the problem, which yes, he is, but that was always a weakness for him. I think naturally stepping up and staying in the program, staying with Willard, staying with Juju and a couple of the other guys is going to help him be a leader on the floor a little bit. And I'm sure we'll talk about it. Playing next to Jacoby is going to help him immensely.
Yeah, and we were talking a lot about Maryland yesterday. We went on a diatribe about Maryland in the Butler preview with Michael DeRosa because of our friend Jamie Kaiser, who was also part of the problem by just not hitting the shots. But yeah, Maryland just couldn't hit shots last year, even though they had Andy Katz, top 10 shooter in the country, Jameer Young, on the team.
Whoa. I was gonna say no slander, but then it's an Andy Katz list. So
yeah, I am a huge Jameer Young fan, but if there's one thing that Jameer Young is not a superstar in, it's shooting the 3-pointer, and it contributed to the problem. Maryland was 320th in the country in effective field goal percentage. The only reason that it's not a dark red when you click the conferences is because of another team that we talked about yesterday, the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, who were an abomination offensively last year. And man, those Maryland Rutgers games were really something.
Dude, you're just trying to slander everything I stand for.
Hey, we gave a lot of praise to Rutgers yesterday. You should listen to that one. But yeah, back to the Terps for this season. We just discussed a little bit of DHS. We'll get into a little more of that later, but I kind of teased it. Julian Reese is going to have to play a much different role this year. He was much more of a true 5 last year, but now Derek Queen comes in. He also will play down low. Maryland is not a stranger to playing with multiple guys that can play down low. Donta Scott played a decent amount down low in the past. You saw that as an effect for sure. But this is different because this is 2 players that make their living down low. How do you think they can coexist?
So it's funny you say that like Juju needs to adjust his role. Like he will, obviously, because he was the 5. So like now he's playing with basically another 5. How are they going to kind of counterbalance each other? I don't think he needs to change that much because like realistically, you kind of know what you get from Juju. Like the hope is walking double every game, and that's it. And that's all they could ever ask for. I think what he averaged like 12, 13, maybe 14 and 10 or 9 last year. that sounds perfectly fine. He's never going to be a plus shooter or a shooter at all, especially when you look at like his form and then also even the numbers and the free throw numbers and stuff like that. It's the ceiling of them as a front court duo and really as a team comes from Derek Queen because he is the creative one. He's the crafty one. He can handle. He has shooting upside a little bit. He has more on-ball ability. So I think you let Juju do what he does and what you know he does, and you kind of let Derek be the guy who maybe not an offensive hub all the time, but last year the problem was everything went through Jameer, every single thing, and they had no choice. And I get that, but now you have a guy who's the exact opposite in style from Jacoby to go through in the post and out of the high post and whatever that's going to be with Derek Queen. So I think the ceiling and the change of the team lies more within Derek than it does Juju.
I understand that. I also just think that there's maybe a misunderstanding of what makes Derek Queen such a special prospect for me, at least. I think that he is just not just being a solid passer from the post, a creative player, but just a dominant post scoring presence. He was 71% at the rim last year on super high volume at Montford. I think taking him away from the rim as consistently as maybe you're suggesting may not be their best plan of attack. And I don't know how much you can do with two low post guys. So that's why I think they're going to have to use Reese in creative ways, use Queen in creative ways. I think they have to be very creative offensively. And that is the one thing with Kevin Willard that I'm not sure how much I trust is his creativity offensively. I do think that this team has an extreme amount of talent and will be able to get the job done. They'll find a rotation that works, whether it's the two guys playing together, whether it's not. But in order for Maryland to be a top 10, 15 team in the country, I have them in the 20 in the top as a top 25 team. But in order for them to exceed that, they will need to be extremely creative with how they use their bigs.
Yeah, I also, just to add on Derek Queen here, I actually think Queen is pretty athletic given like what his frame and weight is. Like,
exactly,
I think nobody's going to score inside on Maryland when Reese and Queen are on the floor at the same time, because Reese was like borderline top 100 guy in block rate last year, and you bring in Queen, who's another really good rim protector himself, and then you guys already kind of touched on it, so I won't go in super deep, but like if Queen gets low post position with the defender on his back, there's no stopping him.
I don't really consider Queen like a dominant rim defender. Maybe that's because he was playing with Cooper Flagg on the same floor so much, so he didn't need to be as dominant of a low post defender. But I do think that Queen is much better offensively than he is defensively at this point in time.
Those two together, like I'm picturing it now, even if they're banging bodies, they're going to draw so many fouls, which could also be an issue with Juju's free throw shooting. But like in the college level, especially in the Big Ten, like it's going to be so annoying to play against them, especially now that Zach Edey's not in the conference. Like they're going to be one of the most, if not the most annoying front courts to play against because they are going to be bigger and stronger and better than everybody down low. Like Jonathan, to your point, like they're going to have so many easy points and easy buckets out of there. They will put other bigs in foul trouble. And I think, honestly, where they're going to win games is when one of them's on the court and one of them's not, and trying to find that balance between the two of them because they're both classic fives. So you put one of the five, they both going to start, and then you take one out, put the other one back in, and swap back and forth until probably the latter of the game. It's going to be nice, honestly, having both of them because now that I'm picturing it, I would not want to play against them on a random Wednesday night in January.
Ryan, do you know, and this is also a question for Jonathan, do you guys know what Derek Queen's free throw percentage was at Montverde last year?
It definitely wasn't good.
It was 78%.
That's very good.
It is very
good. What did he shoot from three last year?
He took 1 3.
Yeah, I was about to say, because I'm pretty sure he shot like 20-something a year before, and then it was like nothing last year. That's actually wildly interesting because free throw shooting.
Not 1, 3. Then he missed all of them.
Well, that's a shame.
I mean,
he only took 11 jump shots.
He didn't have to. Montverde, it wasn't even like a real team.
They didn't need to.
I got my Cooper Flagg jersey on.
Cooper Flagg on the Duke preview. We'll talk about Liam McNeely on the UConn preview. We'll talk about Robert Wright if we do a Baylor preview. I mean, Asa Newell was there, and it was an absurd basketball team.
Yeah.
And one of the best high school teams assembled in a very long time, just based on Flagg, Queen, McNeely, And you look at the team the year before that was also freakishly good with 2 5-stars that didn't even play. They came off the bench and it made me a lot lower on them than I may have been, at least on one of them than I maybe should have been in Kwame Evans, who I now love at Oregon. Right. But on to the point with Queen. His free throw shooting was tremendous last year. I don't know what his free throw shooting is going to look like at Maryland. I don't know what it's going to look like in the Big Ten.
It can't be awful though. Like Juju shot like sub 50, I think, last year in the Big Ten.
Juju so, like, is not a good free throw shooter. He shot 57%.
All right, that's better than I expected. But like, so free throw shooting in bigs is a developmental trait, especially young bigs. Is free throw shooting percentage in a high volume is a very, very not a super reliable, but usually a pretty decent indicator of just like jump shooting in general and spacing ability. Not saying that Queen's going to shoot 40% from three, but he's not going to be a non-shooter completely like Juju is.
Yeah, I mean, if Derek Queen stays however long, I think that can happen. But I also think that an interesting development path is like, I remember when he committed, I'm like, okay, this could be obviously a deluxe version down the road if he stays as long as who I'm about to say. But this could be like in terms of what he can do on you. I saw you look at it. I know exactly what you know exactly what I'm going to say.
I'm just waiting.
He could be Kevin Willard's Angel Delgado at Maryland.
It's not what I was thinking of, but sure.
I think that in terms of just brute physicality, he's the same type of guy as Delgado, but he's more skilled than Delgado was putting the ball on the floor and operating out of the high post.
Angel Delgado is a name I've never thought I'd ever hear again, to be completely honest. He was out of my brain until just now.
Really? What did you think I was going to say?
I didn't think anything. You thought I had something in mind. I'm just sitting there waiting. I'm thinking about crafty bigs. I'm like, there's not really many in college that I love.
I don't really consider Derek Queen a crafty big first. I consider him a power big with craftiness. And
I think it's a balance. I don't think it's one or the other necessarily overpowering the other one. Yeah, but like in college, you don't see guys with like, that's my point, is you don't see a big of his size with the craft and on-ball ability that he has. That's my point.
I think Ryan nailed it, because like when I watch Derek Queen, like one of the reasons that I'm so high on him, and I think I have him ranked like 7th or 8th in my freshman rankings, is not like when you look at him, the first thing you're going to think of is like he's going to kill you in the low post. But like Derek Queen is like for the lack of back to the basket bigs that we have in college basketball and even just in basketball in general today, like Derek Queen is just so advanced for his age.
Yeah.
All right. I agree with that. I think people just straight up underrate how physically dominant he is in the low post.
At least, yeah, you're not trying to slander his craft or anything, or you're actually giving him a compliment, if anything. So I'll take it.
Yeah, I'm higher on Derek Queen than most, if not everybody. So that's I would never be slandering his ability in that sense. Another guy I'm higher on than basically everybody on this Terps team is Jacoby Gillespie. We had a special guest on the podcast. Actually, Jonathan, you want to tell this part?
Yeah, so we actually had Casey Alexander, the Belmont head coach, on the pod back in March, maybe late February, but I think
right before the Valley tournament.
Yeah, it was like the week before the Missouri Valley tournament. And we asked him, like, during the middle of the season, you guys went through a rough stretch. You've picked it up lately. Like, what happened during that stretch? And his answer was very simply, like, Jacoby Gillespie was hurt. And, like, he was the engine that drove that team. He's an elite three-point shooter. He's good in transition. And I think if there's one guy along, I guess you can include Selton Miguel too, I like. But if there's one guy that's going to fix the major issue that Maryland had last year, the biggest issue that Maryland had last year, it's going to be because of Jacoby Gillespie.
Did you ask? Well, how many games did he miss last year? Do you know?
I want to say it was like 8 or something like that in the middle of the season.
Okay, because
they won the first 2 that he missed. They lost the next 5.
Okay.
Sorry, they lost the next 4, then beat UIC at home, and then lost to Indiana State. And then he came back, played 26 minutes against Missouri State off the bench, lost that game. Then when he was back into the starting lineup, 3 straight Ken Pom game MVPs, 3 straight wins, won 8 of their 9 games after that first game back.
Yeah, I don't think people understand how like one, how Kevin Willard is already like it's only this is going to be the second one, but like how he functions now at Maryland is pretty clear, and really how Maryland has functioned for like a decade. Like they are good, basically going to produce an elite point guard if they have someone that's of decent caliber every single year. And he won't be Jameer Young because he doesn't have to be Jameer Young because there's other players that are going to be doing more this year. I have all the confidence in the world that he's going to return. Like, I mean, depends on so many transfers and good guys, but top 10, 20 transfer value. Like he's going to be the hub of a team that could be a top 25 team. And and if that's the case, he'll be an all conference guy in the Big Ten. So
Jacoby Gillespie was a sophomore last season. And
crazy.
I feel like
how did they not win? Like, I understand he was hurt. I asked this to Malik Dia, actually, it was him, Jacoby, Cade Tyson. Like, how did they not win more games? I'm so confused. I understand the injury part, but
they
in
were
the entirety of the
young.
year.
They were very young. They were not particularly deep. Actually, well, this is your league. Go, Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, those were the first two things I would have said. They weren't super deep, and they were really young. Like I was there in St. Louis, and they just got like completely outworked by Northern Iowa. Like there would be nights when Belmont would play another older and I guess better MVC team, and even nights when they would play an older and not as good MVC team, when that team just like looked more experienced, they were taking better shots, and they were being more physical.
And also, if you look at their losses in non-conference play, like Monmouth is obviously not a good loss, but like when
you're just coming after everything I'm about. It's crazy.
Like, Xander Rice is a stud, and he's really hard to stop. And when Malik Dia goes into early foul trouble in that game, you're in trouble. And then like Arizona, they got blown out. Furman, they got blown out. But like they didn't have like horrible losses this past season. They were 115 in KenPom. They weren't bad. What was the text that I sent you about Belmont not very long ago, Jonathan, and like the stat about that program?
Oh, it's like it was something along the lines of like they have like they're like top 5 in wins in the last like decade. Like
Belmont has won 20 games a year or something like that. Belmont has won 20 games every single season since 2011. They've won 19 games every season since 2006.
That's crazy. And now they have NBA players too. It's actually kind of wild.
Yeah, and Cade Tyson is a 6'7" shooter that like could be like a G League guy. Jacoby Gillespie is going to get NBA looks. Malik Diaz is going to get NBA looks.
Malik is probably the one NBA guy, yeah.
I mean, I think Gillespie is going to get NBA looks.
He will, just because the same thing that Jameer got this year. He's younger, a little different, but it's the same kind of thing. Like if any great college guard, like when you're good, you're going to get a summer league chance, etc., and stuff like that. So
but my favorite thing about Jacoby Gillespie is that he was just a sophomore last year.
Yeah, it's crazy.
He could still have 2 more years of college basketball in him. He averaged 17, 4, and 4 on 56% from the field in a good mid-major league as a sophomore, while being really the engine of that team's defense as well on the perimeter. And he can bring that intensity to Maryland, where we know that's what Kevin Willard loves. He loves defensive intensity. It's been a hallmark of all of his teams through the years. Now, he's had a lot of good guards. Gillespie is obviously not the best guard that Kevin Willard has ever coached, but he is one of the better ones that he's coached. And he's got a lot of offensive skill and can be one of the best guards in not just the Big Ten, but in the country next year, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
On Gillespie, he'll be sharing a backcourt with Selton Miguel, Rodney Rice, Deshaun Harris-Smith, as we mentioned. Selton Miguel, part of a surprising USF team last year. They brought him on really late, did Maryland in the offseason, but adds a lot of shooting that they really need.
So badly. I don't think anybody, I did the Maryland preview recently, and nobody shot over 35.5% from three, or like basically 36. And that blows my mind that not a single person on the roster was shooting at a good rate. Like not one player, even though you had a couple of guys who should have been at least decent shooters. Jameer kind of gets the exception because of the usage and whatever he has to. But Selton Miguel he has to start. He has to play so many minutes because he's the best shooter on the team coming in. Probably.
Yeah,
is.
I think he's the best shooter on this.
Yeah.
Team.
He took a pretty big jump shooting last year too. I think he was shooting something around like 33% his first year at South Florida, and then last year he goes up to 39. His efficiency goes up a ton, and like he's just like reliable guy that you can plug and play in any sort of lineup, and you'll know hit shots for you.
Yeah, well, that's literally what the team needed. Like, they needed a lot more last year, but that alone could have put them into better conversations at least.
And what do you think about Rodney Rice?
I don't know. I was high on Rodney Rice when he first cracked into college. I know he's been, I guess it's been, what's my math, a year and a half or maybe like 2 years basically since he played, because
it's been since the end of the 23 season, and he didn't really do all that much because aside from shoot the ball a whole bunch of times,
he basically hasn't played college basketball yet.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. Anytime they can bring in DMV guys also, especially like he was high ranked for a reason, but anytime they bring in DMV guys, I get excited because aside from just him, it builds for the pipeline and stuff like that. And it sounds so stupid, but Maryland fans know out there, and any fans of DMV basketball understand, like they struggled so much to recruit in the area. So anything like this helps. And Derek Queen is like another step, and it's awesome. So
yes, and that is another thing that I want to get into. We talked about it yesterday with Jason on Texas, that they need to recruit better in Dallas and Houston and in the Texas areas, because those are places that have been overrun by obviously UH and Baylor, and even Arkansas has gotten in there and done a better job than Texas at recruiting in Texas. And obviously Trey Johnson is what Rodney Terry and the Texas fan base hopes can be the start of Texas winning back that region. Maryland is now looking to get Derek Queen as like a building block for DMV recruiting, not just a building block for a really, really good basketball team. But the DMV right now is the best collection of basketball talent in the country. And I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that.
It has been for probably 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah,
and those Texas kids are
talent. The WCAC is so competitive every single year. There's so much great basketball played around there in such a small area between Baltimore and the Northern Virginia region. Obviously, like there's a ton of talent that leaves that area and goes to play at IMG or at other or at Montfort or at other prep schools across the country. Some of them are real schools. Others we debate the actual schooling prowess of. But regardless, you look at the last 5-10 years of DMV recruiting, those guys have not been going to Maryland. And even some of the mid-tier and they've also not been going to Georgetown either, Georgetown hasn't been able to recruit. So, and I think that's another thing that Ed Cooley is looking to do at Georgetown is bring back the DMV pipeline. And he obviously brought in Malik Mack this offseason.
Yeah, exactly.
Which doesn't really make sense next to Jayton Epps, but
they're just trying to bring in he's trying to bring in players and anyone they can to create something to be completely honest.
I don't want to go too deep into anything else about Georgetown, though. There's a reason we're not doing a preview on them, but we are for Maryland.
Sorry.
Don't worry. I am a little bit bitter, though, that Maryland swooped in and picked up Jalen Young from Vermont later in the offseason, because I was all ready to put Vermont in my top 100 with that backcourt. Jalen Young, you would have played with Long and Bogues and Hurley, and then Isle Follier in the front court with Fiorillo and all that. But he's a really solid backup guard, I think, from Maryland. Didn't really give what we expected him to give at Memphis. But I think that he's a much more experienced player now than he was a couple years ago, obviously. And he's played for some interesting coaches through the years, and I don't really think that any of the coaches he's played with are schematic geniuses. And I don't think Kevin Willard's a schematic genius either, but he's a pesky defender, and he can pass a little bit.
And I think the biggest thing for Maryland, honestly, you look up, we're talking about Juju and Queen. We mentioned Celton McGill and improved shooting. Deshaun Harris-Smith breakout. Jacoby Gillespie is going to be our guy. But last year, like Jahari Long and Jordan Geronimo were relied on definitely relied on too much. And I think that they can be fine, especially Geronimo in a refined role. And now instead of just them coming off the bench, it's them too. You mentioned Jalen Young. We talked about Rodney Rice, like Chance Stevens. There's guys on the team that you can go to in a second unit, and you can put Deshaun at the one for a little while. You can kind of mix and match different, I guess, combinations and trios in the backcourt, which is going to be very relieving to bring Jacoby out for minutes in a game where Jameer Young played like 40 minutes a game, basically majority of the season. Like he might as well have. So
when they were playing that MTE against UAB last year, I texted Jonathan, no way they just put out a lineup of Long, DHS, Geronimo, Bachelor, Swanton, Roger.
It's tough. That's tough. And
that was a real lineup that played real minutes.
Yeah, it's not.
They lost to UAB and Davidson on a neutral floor. We thought they would go into that and dominate that.
That was the true tell of the season, though. Like that was literally it right there. I was like, well, here we go.
They had no other options off the bench. They had no options off the bench that were truly reliable. It led to their starters playing way too much, which drained their energy. And throughout the season, they would make fewer and fewer shots. They were the worst 3-point shooting team in the Big Ten, as I mentioned, even though they had the best 3-point defense and the best overall defense in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it actually was a pretty decent defensive team. And I'll give that to Kevin Willard. Talk about schematically. He's pretty good defensively on the schematic. So,
but yes, I think that's definitely where he shines. It's where he shined at Seton Hall. It's what he's built his programs on, just the identity of toughness. And I think that this Maryland team is a great blend of toughness and also a lot more offensive skill.
Yeah.
I don't think I don't really think we're going to see a ton of like Tafara Gapare this year or really ever in.
He'll play. He'll play because he has to, because they're pretty thin behind the two bigs in the front court, but they're also going to probably run 4-guard lineups sometimes also because they have more depth in the backcourt and stuff. But I'm missing someone. But they're very thin in the front court behind the two starters, which is okay because they're both 5, so you can run one of them in 4 guards in a college game pretty easily.
Yeah, and I actually think that's going to be what they end up doing to get most of their minutes.
Yeah,
and you look at, Gapare. I just mentioned him. He was very raw at UMass 2 years ago. He was very raw at Georgia Tech last year. The idea there was kind of like you buy a lower tier high major takes a swing on upside.
Yeah.
And it didn't really work out. He didn't give them as much as they were hoping for. He was solid defensively, but he didn't give them as much as they were hoping for. And then he ends up transferring up again. I feel like Maryland had spent a lot of money on some other guys in this cycle. I mean, they needed to spend a lot to retain Julian Reese. I'm pretty sure. Jacoby Gillespie probably cost a lot, especially considering how quickly they snapped him up. I feel like I remember a rumor of a huge number being thrown out.
That was a weird one, yeah. Well, it was him or Malik Mack. It was one or the other, and they were prioritizing Jacoby, yeah.
Yeah, Mack's number got really, really high as well.
I just would rather have Jacoby, like no matter.
Oh yeah, Jacoby's better than Malik.
Well, that's what they wanted to. Okay. I think it was this like the same week it was all going down too for the both of them. So it was like you better not miss out on both of them, and they were obviously going to get one. So
yeah, Mack ended up taking a little bit longer to commit though. I remember that happening.
Yeah, but he got the Maryland tattoo on his wrist.
Yeah,
so he was waiting.
Yeah, and then Maryland ended up with Gillespie. They also bring in Malachi Palmer and Braden Pierce, 2 other freshmen that, Pierce might end up seeing some minutes as like an emergency 5, but no more than like 3 or 4 in a given game, probably.
Yeah, after we talk about the thin front court, that's who I was forgetting. I knew he was a freshman. That's the point of like you're going to get thin, whether someone picks injury up, the fitness, foul trouble, just like some fresh minutes and stuff like that. Like he'll play at some point, but how much obviously is probably limited.
And I know he wasn't very good last year, but I do think it's important that they brought Jordan Geronimo back.
Yep.
As just another body in there that's very experienced. He's played 4 years of Big Ten basketball. He's played in the NCAA tournament. Well, he played 2 years ago in the NCAA tournament. He didn't get many minutes in the 23 one, but he did in the 22 one. But whatever.
Yeah.
He's played in the NCAA tournament. He's played for solid teams. And
he's someone I'm sneakily like not necessarily excited for this year, but I am happy that he's back. Like you're saying, I was looking at it before. I'm trying to pull it up. His 3-point percentages were pretty solid, except for his third year at IU, so not last season, but the year before he came to Maryland. But it plummeted last year because he was shooting more. His 3-point rate went from like in the mid 20s to like mid 30 percentiles.
Yeah. So
he was shooting a lot more because he had to, because no one else could shoot on the team. So his efficiencies went down even more. He shot like sub 20 or something like that from 3. So the hope is that he'll play the same or a little less this year, shoot the ball in more select situations, and be a more effective shooter and player. So
yeah, I mean, he played 54% of the minutes last year. I think he plays like 36 to 41% of the minutes this year.
He is older, like you said, though. Like he's older, he's experienced, he's been in the Big Ten, so they're going to rely on him, even if it's off the floor, to do a lot of things for them. So
yeah, this is not a very there's a bunch of older players on this team, but this team is core. A lot of the core is underclassmen with Gillespie. Well, Gillespie's not an underclassman, but he's young. He's a junior. Harris Smith's a sophomore. Queen's a freshman, and then Rodney Rice hasn't played much college basketball.
Senior.
Jalen Young has had he's a senior, but he's also not really had a huge role anywhere, and he's not going to have a huge role here. Selton Miguel has been around for a while, but last year was the first year that he truly stepped into a role and really excelled in that role. And I think Jordan Geronimo, being a guy who's played a role for 4 years in college basketball, will be an important just guy to have as a sounding board for younger guys on this team.
Yeah, and to your point, like now that you say it like that, like they do this a lot. They schedule a pretty weak out of conference schedule. But I know we play Syracuse and Marquette early on. I think Nova, but they might start off. They might need adjustment period, and there's going to be 3 or 4 pretty easy games start the year. So hopefully that's it. But
they start off with Manhattan. Yeah. I know that for a fact.
Yeah, it's just loaded actually. Manhattan, Mount St. Mary's, Florida A&M, then Marquette, Canisius, Nova, Bucknell, Alcorn State. Like they need to win every single game except for Syracuse, Nova, and Marquette. Like you got to win at least 2 of those. Marquette's obviously going to be good, but like realistically, you should be striving to win every single out of conference game they have, because those are the only 3 that they can afford to lose at all, and you really can't afford to lose all 3. But I think they might, because of the inexperience, especially returning guys and roster continuity, they're probably going to take a little bit of time to get adjusted.
I'm definitely excited for that Marquette game, though. I think that's going to be a fun one. Marquette returns a ton of guys, but also loses a lot of important pieces. Yeah. And I think they'll be able to beat Villanova and Syracuse. I know both of those games are neutral, and even as neutral games, they're closer to the crowd will probably favor the opposing team, just given where the games are, Newark and Brooklyn.
Maryland, I did not know they're playing in Newark. I'm there. I'll be there in a hot second.
Yeah, that's 24th. What day of the week is that?
It's the Sunday.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm at Mohegan Sun that day.
Sunday at the Rock. I'll be there.
Yeah, there's a bunch of interesting games at the Rock this year.
Seton Hall games.
Yes.
Seton Hall. I think Rutgers has to go there this year. Does Rutgers have to go there, or are they playing in Piscataway?
No, Rutgers plays Seton Hall in Piscataway, but Rutgers plays Princeton at the Rock.
Interesting. That's a fun one.
It's December 21st, same day as Maryland, Syracuse, and Brooklyn. And same day as the CBS Sports Classic at the Garden.
Ooh.
It's a huge
I don't know how that's going to work out.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what my plan is for that day. It will almost definitely include Syracuse, Maryland, though. But yeah, this non-conference schedule, it's not a super challenging one. But the Big Ten is a grind of a schedule every single year, even if the teams aren't even if the teams aren't always great in the Big Ten, they're always competitive and scrappy. Every Big Ten game is a rock fight.
It's miserable.
Nail for every inch. We were talking about this with Rutgers yesterday, especially when a slower paced team like Maryland or Rutgers is involved.
Like you said it before, the Maryland Rutgers games in the past, I've been to basically one every single year. They have been tough to watch. They'll be different this year. They'll be a lot better. But it's a really good point. And Rutgers, especially with the lack of shooting that they've had in the last few years, and like watching like good teams go into Piscataway, into the rack, or they call it Jersey Mike's Arena now, like small 7,000, 6,000 person arena where it's like fire hazards. You can't even build an arena like that anymore. Like, and they just crunch the game down. Like it's miserable to play against them there. But this year it'll be a little different. So it won't be fun to play against them still. It'll be worse because they're going to be good, but it's a different style at least.
All right. Anything else to add on Maryland before I ask you some final questions?
Go Terps. That's all I got to say. I honestly hope that they need to make the tournament with this team. If they don't, unless there's injuries or like obviously outside situations, but in like realistically, they've got to make the tournament safely. They don't have to be a top 10, 15 team all year. I'm not expecting that. That'd be nice, but make a tournament safely and do some damage, try to get to the second weekend. So that's the goal.
I think this is a top 25 caliber team in a lot of senses, although I wouldn't be surprised if they end up finishing in the 30s or 40s.
Yeah, exactly.
I would think be surprised if they don't make the NCAA tournament this year.
Yeah.
We've done a couple previews. I think that of the teams that we've previewed so far, which are Kentucky, Missouri, Texas, Rutgers,
Butler,
and now Maryland. Maryland is higher in my rankings than any of those.
Yeah, there's a couple that are close.
Yeah. And I think that I definitely think both Texas and Kentucky will make the tournament, but I'm not as certain that they'll make the tournament as I am with Maryland. I think Maryland's going to have a really good year this year.
Yeah.
And as I said, there's a real ceiling with this team as like a top 15, top 10 team. I don't think they're going to get there, but it's certainly possible if they're really creative in the way that they create offense for their bigs and for their wings coming off of their bigs. It's just that Kevin Miller doesn't really have the greatest track record of being super creative offensively.
Hopefully times are changing.
Like down on that whiteboard, hey, Miles, get a bucket.
I mean, what would you do?
I'm not saying I wouldn't do that. I'm not saying I wouldn't do that, but
you can try it with the other Miles Kale.
Miles Kale has been on every Seton Hall team ever.
I love that theory.
And to be fair, last year, like he had to do the same thing half the time, and he could have done more. Obviously, a lot of it was on him, but he had to be like, Jameer, please save us, and he did. So
all right. So my question for you: what do you think? You already said like they have to make the tournament. You think that's the sentiment that's shared by all Maryland fans right now?
I actually haven't been tapped in. So I usually rely on my older brother. He's a big message board guy, huge, and I am not. I do not like doing that because I see things differently. I see it on like a national scale, not like team by team, whatever. I would assume that yes, they're saying like we want to be in the top 25 majority, if not all of the year that we can, and they have high standards. Making the tournament safely, not just making the tournament, making the tournament safely where you're not worried about the bubble in the last 2 or 3 weeks of the season. And you're even if they're like, oh, they could be upwards of a 5 or 6 or down to like a 8 or 9, like that would be fine. But that would be like an okay standard, not like we had a great season standard.
And then what do you think is the most realistic expectation for this Terps team?
Realistic expectation?
Yeah. Well, what is your realistic expectation?
Well, they added 4 teams, right, to the Big Ten, or 3 or 4. They added 4. I was about to say, a realistic expectation is finishing like, I want to say like top shit, it's tough. I'll say like top 6 in the Big Ten. And then like borderline top 25, like in and out of the top 25 all year long.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And again, the thing about the Big Ten is like you look at teams like Michigan, Oregon, Illinois, like all of those teams, and then Rutgers, Iowa, Indiana,
Purdue. Yeah,
I mean, I like Purdue. I have a little bit above some of those teams.
No, but you're naming so many teams that could be good. They could be very good.
Yeah.
But like I'm just saying, like I think and even yes, I'll throw in Purdue. Just the top of the Big Ten has so much fluidity this year.
Yeah.
And it did last year too. There was like 2 games separating 2 through like 11.
It's every year. Like you said, it is a literal dogfight no matter who is playing against who. If Minnesota is or whoever is traveling to UCLA on a Tuesday night, it's going to be a dogfight no matter what.
That game sounds like it would be completely unwatchable.
I'll be up. I will be up at 1 o'clock in the morning watching that.
I'll be up. I'll just be watching Oregon. I'll just be watching Oregon hosting
Rutgers. See, those are the games. That's a good to forward to. There really is a lot of teams. There's probably like 8 or 9 teams who can be good.
I cannot wait for Oregon, Washington on the Big Ten Network.
Yeah, it doesn't sound right. Come on now.
No, does not sound right at all. Jonathan, you want to take us home?
Yep, let's do it. If you came to hear about Tyler Self and what he's doing for his work, you came to the right place. If you came to hear about a Maryland team that is going to have a 36% three-point shooter this year, you came to the right place. And if you came to hear about Caleb Grill and what he's up to, you came to the right place. This is Season 5, Episode 14 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers. Thanks so much to Ryan Hammer for joining us to preview Maryland. We'll see you next time.